All right, well, last week we learned how we are given the work of God's compassion to live as his people, to use our gifts to honor God as we further his mission in the world. Now, this week we will hear Christ describe the kind of difficulty that we can expect to find as we seek to live for God's purpose. But also, we will learn of the support that we have been promised from God. Let us read the first portion of our text this morning from Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 16. Jesus says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child. The children will rise against parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household?" All right, so the first thing that Jesus does is prepare us for the difficult things to come. And it is not really a matter of whether they will come, but rather, as Jesus says himself, when they deliver you over and when they persecute you. And he explains his logic for saying this at the end when he says, since they treated me the way they have, by basically calling me evil incarnate, what do you think they will say about you? And this is the first thing that we must take away from these words. The work that we do in the world is a work done among wolves. It is not done among friends who wish us well. It is not done, generally speaking, among fair-minded, honest, good-natured folk who will see us for who we are, and even if they may disagree, will at least give us the dignity of a fair shake. That is not the nature of this world on the whole. That is not the nature of those who have built the systems around us or control the systems around us or who feed us lies on the internet or on the news to propagate the systems that are used against the people that they should serve. It is not the nature of many of the people that we know at work or school. It is not the nature of many religious leaders or politicians. What Jesus is saying is that it is not the nature of people lost in their sin to be harmless and loving sheep, but rather it is their nature to be wolves. Now I know how this sounds. This sounds very cynical. Surely it's not, as bad as all of that. Well, I don't think what Jesus is saying is that people in the world, never have moments in which they show any kindness at all, that they never look after others or do things for others in self-sacrificing ways. I think we can all recognize that as dark as the world can be, there is still a glimmer of good, the good that God created in us as a reflection of his own. There is still beauty and honor and love, and even among the lost. But that's not really the point here. The point is actually this. It's fine to recognize the good, to see signs of hope. Sure, God's grace is still here in this world, preserving the world for a time, but that doesn't give us an excuse to be naive, to turn a blind eye to the truth of things as they are on the whole, which is the world is full of wolves. So let's not be stupid sheep. Let's be innocent as sheep, but also let us be wise. As we go about our mission in this world, as we have to be aware of the danger all around us. We have to be aware that there will be people who want us to fail. They want our church to fail. They will want our school to fail. They will want our families to fail, and even our faith to fail. They will rejoice if they think that they see it happen. They will do what they can to see it happen. We aren't talking about random people coming out of the woodwork to do it. There may be those. But what Jesus just warned us about, what we are talking about, well, we are talking about your brother or your sister. We are talking about your own father or mother. These can be the very wolves Jesus is warning us about. Not that we should always live closed off and suspicious of everyone close to us, but that's not the point. But the point is, in this dark world, you will be surprised by the people who come to hate you simply for wanting to live for God and to do His work of compassion in this world. You will be surprised what they will call you, how they will misinterpret everything you are and say and what you stand for. People will come for you. That is what Jesus is telling us. People will come and demand an account from you, and they won't necessarily give you a fair hearing. They won't really care because, they already know that they hate you. So this is what Jesus is telling us. Don't be naive. Don't be blind to the nature of this world and to the nature of our spiritual struggle, as it will inevitably manifest in this world. The world is not our friend, but that's okay because God is. And Jesus tells us, do not fear. Be aware, but do not be anxious. Well, what are we to do when the wolves come? What are we to say for ourselves when they call on us to give account? Jesus says at that moment, at that very moment, it will not even be you who will be speaking, but it will be God Himself who will speak through you. Amazing. But what does that mean? It means, listen, God has got your back. What we need to say, what we need to do in our most dire hour as Christians, God is not leaving us to our own devices. He is not leaving us without any friends. And even if we are alone and it's only us, and in that moment we have no one else, we still have God. So what is Jesus saying here? What is His message to these 12 apostles as He sends them that day? And what is His message to us today as His church? God's message to us is this: the world is full of wolves, but you've got this. Church, you can do this. We can do it. We can do this together. We can do this with God. And we know this because God told us this. This is what Jesus is saying here to His apostles, and it's what He is saying here to us today. And here's what Jesus says next. Let's read what else He says on the subject here in verse 26. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear Him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but even the hairs of your head are still numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. You know, in a world full of wolves, we might be tempted to think, fear, it's only natural. And you know what? It's partly true. Part of being wise is to be aware of the danger, and with that awareness comes fear. And in this way, fear is a rational response, but that's not the whole story. If we make that the whole story, then that's where we get off track. When we let our fear consume us and control our actions, then that's where we get off track. When we let our fear make us forget about God, well, that's as far off the track as we can get. But you know what? We can get back on the track. You see, fear flourishes in the shadows of the unknown. But Jesus says, nothing is covered that will not be revealed. Nothing can stay hidden in the shadows forever. Who a person will be, whether they will be a wolf in the end, these things are known by God, and they will be made known to us in time, like a horror movie when you turn off the sound, like the boogeyman when you turn on the lights. The shadows of this world will flee when the children of God speak his light. And hearts will be revealed, and we must be the first to let our hearts be revealed if indeed we are God's children. You know, God's children do not hide. We do not hide from the truth, no matter how inconvenient or convicting it may be to us. And that is what Christ means when he says, the things I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. You see, as Christians, we know the shepherd's voice. As Paul will write in 1 Corinthians, spiritual things can only be discerned by spiritual people. And we have the Spirit of God revealing to us the mind of God, first convicting us and showing us there is no reason to hide. And this correlates here with what Jesus says, because the things that God whispers to us, the things that our heart knows about God and his ways and ourselves and our own ways, these are the things that we must live out and reveal to the world. This is ultimately the difference between wolves and sheep. You see, Jesus explains it well when he says in the Gospel of John that everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. And there are those who hide, and there are those who shine. And Jesus is telling us today, do not fear those who hide in the shadows, but don't be like them either. If we love the truth, not only will we not fear those who lurk in the shadows devising harm, but we will also speak freely of the truth we know and have come to embrace with all of our lives. We will live a life of full transparency so that all the world can see what God has done and is doing in us. Will that make us vulnerable? In a way, yes. He is, after all, sending us as sheep among wolves. But that's not the whole story either. For as Christ tells us, why should we fear man when the worst that they can do is to kill our mortal bodies, which God will simply raise up in glory on the last day? You know, there is a logic here that supersedes any conceivable fear. And that logic is based on one final truth I would like to point out from this portion of the text, namely, that we are of infinite value to God. Our relationship with him is secure and eternal. And this is where the strength of faith begins. For what difficulty could possibly overwhelm our hearts if we are resting in his knowledge? What happens to us here in this life, it's not the final word about us. God reserves the right to speak the final word about his children. When they malign us, that is not the final word. When they lie, that is not the final word. When they literally kill us as evildoers, as intolerant, backwards, insolent religious fools, that will not be the final word, my friends. The final word belongs to God. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the resurrection and the life. The world will lie and slander and even murder. They will do all of these things, and Jesus wants to make sure that we realize this. He wants to make sure that we realize exactly how the world will receive us. And so he tells us next that we should not expect peace, but rather the sword. In a way, this is what Jesus brings, because in the context of an evil world, that is what will come about as men and women reject God's peace and those who bring it. And let us read now from verse 34. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Now, the topic this morning has been wisdom as Christ's disciples in the world. As he sends us into this world, we must avoid naivety regarding our relationship with the world. And we do this by looking to Christ's own words as he tells us that the result of what he brings will not be unification, not with those who remain in sin, but rather division. It will not be to draw families together, but to tear them apart. That receiving the Lord, being joined to God, may often lead to causing a separation between those who do not. In this context, the cross we must bear as Christians is relational. The life we are called to lose in these verses is a life that values its natural relationships above its relationship to God. The cross of relational alienation, that is not always the price we pay in every relationship, but it can be. And again, today's message has been about awareness, not to turn a blind eye to the reality of the world or our life as Christians in this world. And many we love may still be a part of the world, and that is their reality. And it does us very little good to pretend otherwise. In fact, it could be to our great harm and theirs. For we must pray for them according to God's will. We must pray for them according to the truth. And realize that Jesus did come to bring peace, but also he did not. Peace with God. Well, Jesus came to bring that kind of peace. Peace with the world. Well, for those of the world who turn to God, yes. Even peace for those lost sheep living in the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have the everlasting life of God. But there will always be those who spurn God's offer. And the result of their choice will not be peace, but rather strife. Strife with God and strife with those of us who choose peace with God. And how they receive us as those who bring God's peace is how they receive God. And if we are sent to do God's will, and we do God's will by bringing his message of peace, then those who reject us reject God. Well, maybe it's better to put it this way. Those who have rejected God will extend that rejection to include us. Those who hate God will extend that hatred. And the inverse is also true. When God is working in somebody's heart, their hearts become warm to Him. Their hearts begin to thirst for the truth of His word. And the person who brings that truth is like a cloud that brings rain over a dry and desert land. Gladly they receive us, and in so doing they receive God. This is what Christ speaks of next in verse 40. Let's just read that for ourselves. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet, because he is a prophet, will receive a prophet's reward. And the one who receives a righteous person, because he is a righteous person, will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water, because he is a disciple, truly, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now there are some who will never receive anyone. Their heads are as hard as their hearts. They have nothing to learn or to gain from anyone. Now in a few weeks we will be learning about the nature of evil and those lost in it. But what we need to realize for today is simply this: the reward that those people will get from God will be nothing more or less than the wages their own sinful life has earned. In this life, they embraced nothing as from God. Therefore, they will receive nothing from God. In these verses, Jesus is showing us that there is a way of seeing all of our life within these two vectors: what we've excluded from ourselves and what we've embraced. This is what Christ is speaking of. What have we embraced in our life? What have we excluded from our life? What love and compassion have we given? A cup of water to those who would serve God? And what love have we withheld? What greed have we allowed to deceive us into thinking that all of this was for us? That we ourselves decide what is true, that we ourselves decide what is right, that we should live for and love in this life. These are the things that will define our lives in God's eyes. This world is so blind to think that they can bring their own identity and their own truth into the world by the power of self-assertion. Vanity. That is a power that belongs to the Creator alone. But how many of us, living as we do in this world with these influences all around us, how many of us are truly living for God's purposes? And so with these final moments, we reflect on the nature of life as those who have been given life. We did not self-assert ourselves into existence. We've received it. Everything we have from God. And so, what will we do with what we've received? Will we open our hearts to God so that we can receive more from Him? Will we embrace His ways and His truth with our own lives? I hope we will. For this is the wisest thing that we could ever do as sheep in a world of wolves. Let us pray.